Hello, friends. Welcome to ADD Masterminds. I'm Bridget Watt, and I'm here with Jimmy, the amazing talking table.
Hi, it is I, Jimmy, the amazing, awesome talking table.
Oh, man, you had to add awesome.
I had to add that extra adjective because I'm just cool like that.
You're just back to being awesome again.
I'm just, using my privilege.
But we don't get political. So, the Atlanta Braves won the World Series.
Holy cow. Oh, wait a second. That's the Chicago Cubs.
That's baseball, right?
Yeah, it's baseball.
Some little known American sport called baseball.
I think it's a little league game, right?
I don't know how big the league is.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter to me how big the league is. So
that's hurtful.
Well, you're welcome. We just led off with sports, which is maybe it might be one of the things we shouldn't talk about on the podcast.
Yeah, because we don't talk about politics.
Yeah, so like whatever. Hey, so I was thinking about how there's always fallout for your convictions.
Sure.
So like when you have conviction about something, there's potential for a fallout. And I'm not sure how to get into this without getting too terribly political, but if your best friend is gay and they get married, and your conviction is that you should not attend a gay wedding, that's going to create some problems.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe though. I mean, like if they're your best friend, then they probably already understand your position on such issues, and ultimately somebody's going to have to make a decision of, are they going to allow their feelings regarding their marriage and whether somebody else accepts their marriage or not to influence if they can continue to be friends? Because that could be something that fractures the friendship, but it's ultimately going to depend on how the two parties decide to work on it.
Yeah, I guess. And that's one example. It's a pretty drastic example.
Right.
But another example of a conviction could be like, I don't eat bacon.
Right.
And so it's like I come over to someone's house and they're serving bacon. There's a follow-up for my conviction because I can say, well, I don't eat bacon.
You have to serve me something else.
Or do I give up that conviction for that moment?
That's what you tell them. You only eat birthday cake that has a gay wedding logo on top of it.
Mm-hmm. There you go. I don't know. It's funny because like even the whole gay wedding thing, I think there are Christians who are completely affirming. There's Christians who are unaffirming, right? And like for an affirming Christian, that'd be easy. They'd just be like, yeah, I can love my friend by coming to their wedding, no problem. If you're unaffirming, it's like you either don't attend the wedding or you attend the wedding, but say like, but I don't condone this, or I don't know. Like, I don't know. When it comes to people's lives, I guess for me, my struggle with it is like, am I holding to my convictions for my own sake? Right? Am I holding to my convictions because I'm worried about what other people in my church would think? Am I holding to my convictions because I'm worried about what God would think? God would be angry with me if I ate this bacon. Let's keep it at the harmless one.
All right.
God would be mad at me if I ate this bacon. And like at that level, I'm kind of like, I don't know if God would really be mad at you for eating the bacon. I don't know if God would be angry with you for a lot of things that you do out of love for another person. And like personally, I'd rather err on love. And so I know that if my conviction is to be more accepting of people, despite the way people read the Bible, then the fallout of that is that my more conservative brethren will be more willing to kick me out of the faith because I'm not scriptural. And that's the fallout for me. And I think that's the difficulty with trying to be that bridge, is that often I'm more willing to bridge between me and the atheists than I am to bridge between me and my fundamentalist brother.
You know, even if you were to bring it into the realm of not even necessarily gay marriage, but like there are people I know who that they've had family not attend their wedding because they did not approve of the marriage, and it was a heterosexual marriage. Like they just thought like, nope, you guys are a terrible match for whatever reason. I do not support you getting married to this person. I don't think they really love you, or I think they are a psychopath, or I don't this, that, or the other, you know, whatever the reason is. And I've known people who, like a friend of mine that I just had dinner with tonight, her own father did not attend her wedding because he strongly disagreed with the guy that she was getting married to.
What was the fallout of him not attending that wedding?
Well, he just wasn't the wedding. He just wasn't at the wedding. And, you know, it put a strain on the relationship, obviously, between her husband and her father. There's obviously a issue there. But like they're civil about their relationship, but they're not like, oh, son, oh, father, like, you know, they don't have that sort of relationship from what I understand.
They're not super tight.
Right. No, they're not tight at all. He has no interest in, like, they have no interest in being tight. It's pretty much a professional relationship at this point. And that puts strain on the daughter still, like, because she wishes she had a father who accepted her husband. And you know, she wishes her husband could, you know, be happy about his father-in-law, but they're not. And, you know, so I don't think it necessarily, like, sometimes it's just like you have to sit there and think, and especially since it's a common like liturgical element of a lot of weddings for ministers to allude to or make reference to or even ask the congregation to participate in the vows. It would be like, do you, all who are a witness here today, vow to support this holy marriage and blah, blah, blah. You know, so sometimes that happens. And, you know, so, you know, it's more than, for some people, it's more than am I just going to be a bystander there who's saying, you know, I love you and I'm here for you no matter what, but it's an issue of, can I truly support this union? And, you know, I think, you know, whether it's straight marriage or gay marriage or whatever, like sometimes there might be somebody you just believe is terribly not matched. And I would say, you know, maybe this, her father has legitimate reason why he's not supportive of her marrying this guy. And I know the reason. I'm not going to air their business like that as to why he disapproves. But you know, that could be a situation where, like, you have to sit there and think, right? He could be a serial killer. She married O.J. Simpson. You know, would you support your daughter marrying O.J. Simpson? Would you go to that wedding? Well, that seems like that could be a legitimate, like saying, no, honey, I'm going to pass on that one.
OJ didn't do it, by the way.
Right. But, you know, and I've known of like I will say my ex, for example, her prior ex, they were wanting to get married and her parents radically disagreed with them getting married, and they were just going to give them money and tell them, go to Vegas. They weren't going to attend. So, you know, because they just so strongly disapproved with the guy she was marrying.
It seems to me, though, like in all these situations, you're kind of siding with the person who's got the convictions and sticking to them. Do you think that there's any scenario where the conviction itself is ridiculous and it's
I
not worth
think,
destroying relationships over.
yeah, I think there could definitely be like ridiculous reasons, like, oh, he has red hair and I hate red hair people, or hey, he's a Republican. I
Because
hate.
I just think that there's, I don't know, like what I know, the God that I know isn't nitpicky about this kind of stuff, like, and I mean, like, if somebody's getting married to someone that you're like, I don't know if this is a good idea, or I think this is a bad idea. It's like, is me being at the wedding mean that I contributed to the sin of this marriage? I mean, the wedding would happen either way, right? And I
Right.
think that there's just a lot of scenarios where we hold so tight to our convictions, but don't care what the fallout is. And I feel
Yeah.
like this is very much a Christian thing within Christian culture, where it's like, I am not doing this. The world says we must do this, but I am not doing this.
Right.
Halloween. This is actually what sparked this whole thought to me, was the
Huh.
whole idea of like the family that chooses not to celebrate Halloween, and they put up a sign on their doorstep that says, we do not celebrate Halloween. And I'm like, okay, so you're holding to your convictions because you're afraid that it has like demonic roots. Okay, that's fine. I understand that. But you also had to put a sign to tell everyone we don't
Right.
celebrate this evil holiday. And I'm
Right.
like, what's the fallout of this? And I think the fallout for a lot of Christian convictions like this is that people are like, oh, I get it. You're part of an exclusive club that nobody wants to be a part of. That's the fallout. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that it's wrong to have that sign up, but I'm just saying that's what the fallout actually is. So you have to question, and it's the same thing with, like your gay friend, same thing with your daughter who's marrying a guy you don't approve of. You have to really sit down and say, okay, is this conviction really worth the fallout that I know is going to happen? And I think that's something we all have to evaluate. What is the fruit of my conviction? Because if the fruit of my conviction is not love, I may be doing the wrong thing.
All I know is if some kid comes to my door asking for candy and he's dressed up like OJ Simpson, no candy.
I've been thinking a lot about like that concept, greater love has no man than to lay down his life. And I actually talked about this with my atheist friend, Matt Oxley. And I thought something that was really interesting, because I was basically saying like that we always take it as like, I would take a bullet for you. Should that very unlikely scenario happen, I would take a bullet for
Right.
you. And we leave it at that. And I'm like, the reality is, what is love? Like, love is
Right.
laying down your ego. Like, sure, you take a bullet for me, but would you lay down your ego
Right.
and come to my gay wedding? I don't know. Like, I'm just saying, right? Like, it's like,
Right.
I think there are some things, there are some scenarios. And I mean, what's really interesting, and this has kind of come together for me over this last week, is like, I did that episode with Matt, and he said something along the lines of, it seems to me you love your God more than me. To which I think a lot of Christians would say, duh, of course I love my God more than you, right? But
Right.
that's not a compliment coming from an atheist. They're like,
Yeah.
you love your God more than me, and your God is not love. Like, that's what they see, right?
Mm.
And so I was thinking about like, okay, so greater love has no man than to lay down his life for his friend. But it's like, am I willing to lay down my theology for a friend? Am I willing to lay down, my convictions
Right.
for a friend sometimes? Because that's the
I,
right
I,
thing to do. Like, it's sometimes the loving thing to do is to say, all right, I'm going to risk this
right.
because I want to make sure you're okay. I want to
Well,
make sure that you feel loved.
but is it necessarily the loving thing to be there at the wedding if you think it's the wrong thing to do? Like John the Baptist had no problem calling out Herod, saying, "Hey, Herod, there's somebody you're married to right now, and it's unlawful for you to have her." to his present wife. Well, that probably made Herod feel kind of excluded from the kingdom of God. That probably made Herod's wife feel a little excluded from the kingdom of God. But John the Baptist, had no problem saying, "Hey, Herod," like right to his face,
And
with an earshot.
what was the fruit of his conviction?
The fruit of his conviction, I don't. He lost his head.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think it's possible that John the Baptist did the wrong thing.
Yeah,
later on in the Bible, like the Apostle Paul says, don't judge those outside of the church, right?
Right.
And so it's like, and so I question whether he did the right thing by calling him out for that. It's like, how did that didn't help anything.
I mean, technically Herod was part of the covenant community, so.
Was he?
At that time. Yeah, he was a Jew, so.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to judge John the Baptist, but I'm like, I don't know if that's a great example of conviction leading to good fruit.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right?
Maybe not, but I still think there's I don't necessarily think that showing up and supporting somebody that you don't support, somebody you believe is genuinely making a grave mistake, sometimes that's going to cause a fracture in a relationship, but not just because it causes a fracture in a relationship doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. Sometimes relationships have to suffer such fractures. And that can be a good thing in and of itself. Not as I need to do this so I can keep myself holy and pure. Like, I'm not going to go to a gay wedding and all of a sudden that was a really touching ceremony. Let me see if I can find a dude to kiss. I'm not going to worry about going to a gay wedding and catching it, so
that wedding was so good. I want a man.
Right. His white tux was just so dashing. I don't see that as an issue. And honestly, I wouldn't feel threatened in all at my personal conviction. I wouldn't feel threatened or I don't think it would be wrong for me to go to a gay wedding. I don't think it would be bad for me to refrain either. I think it's one of those issues that the Apostle Paul talks about us having our own conviction. Whatever your conviction you have it happy before the Lord.
Yeah, it's like the food sacrificed to an idol.
Right. And so if you can do it in a clean conscience, do it in a clean conscience. Mm-hmm. If you can't do it with a clean conscience, then don't. And then don't judge those who do.
Well, and I think this is the thing too, it's the whole if it offends a brother, don't do it. Right. And people tend to use that for alcohol. How dare alcohol?
Then I'll be I'll be sure to never marry a dude.
Yeah. But I mean, to me, when I read that scripture that says don't do things that are going to cause a weaker brother to fail, I don't look at that and say, hey, I'm the weaker brother, so here's a list of all the things you guys can't do in front of me, right? I look at that and I'm thinking, don't be quick to offend, don't be quick to be offended. I'm I want to try to make life easier for those around me. I want to make life better for those around me. So if I'm going to have convictions, I want to make sure those are convictions in which I have counted the cost and I know that the fruits of my conviction are going to be good and that I'm not just trying to save my own neck all the time. Because I think it's I think a lot of times where Christians get to is they're well, God's going to be mad at me for endorsing another person's sin by pretending I'm okay with it. And I'm I don't know if God's going to be mad at you for that, especially when you got somebody who's been told all of their life that what they do or who they are is a sin. And you're should I be one more Christian to pile on top of them? Or do I give this person unconditional love because whatever they're doing isn't really harming me anyways? Isn't really harming anyone anyways. I just know that if I was in that position, I would like to think I would make a different choice, right? And I think that's what it comes down to. And so I'm I think there's almost an element of selfishness to holding to your own convictions in a way, because you're just I'm just trying to cover my own butt here. And it doesn't matter who I hurt, I'm going to cover my butt. And so
Right.
I don't know. I just think that we all need to evaluate our convictions. And even me and my, God is love conviction. I know that there are going to be a lot of
That's
people
crazy. That's heresy.
alienated by me being fixated on his love and not
Right.
on his justice when it comes to personal sins that don't hurt other people.
Well, if you're going to err on anything, I'd rather you err on the side of love. So
Don't encourage me, Jimmy. Okay, I was listening to this podcast where they were talking about forgiveness, and I think this is another really interesting kind of Christian concept, with forgiveness, because people are kind of like, well, if I forgive someone, that means I now need to be okay with them. This person abused me, but now I need to
Right.
be okay with them. And I think there's kind of a mistake in not giving people actual consequences for their actions, replatforming people that shouldn't be replatformed, and all this stuff. But I really liked this statement that a psychologist made on the You Have Permission podcast with Dan Koch. She said, I want good things for you, but not with me. And I was like, wow. And I'm sure there's people you can think of, Jimmy, that you have to cut out of your life.
Right.
But in order to forgive them, you can look at them and say, I want good things for you,
Right.
but not with me. And I'm like,
Right.
that is beautiful.
Right. Oh yeah. I definitely believe that 100%. I believe you can forgive somebody, but there is a point, but forgiving somebody is not the same as two walking together in agreement.
Yeah.
And I think, if there is a bond that's broken for whatever reason, like you can forgive that, but that doesn't mean you automatically rejoin those broken links.
Exactly.
And because some things, like it's a matter of rest, like there's forgiveness and then there's restoration. And restoration takes two people working things out together to mutually agree upon, a process and an end result, and what that's going to look like. It's going to be a negotiated relationship. It's going to involve people acknowledging that their sins, confessing their sins, asking for forgiveness, and then moving forward. But there's some relationships that maybe you even shouldn't try, as far as that goes. Like, I would not be like, hey, that guy who molested you over there when you were a child, you not only need to forgive him, but you need to go meet with him weekly at Starbucks and talk about life. Like, no, I don't think that needs to happen. Like, there's just some doors that need to remain shut. And there's some roles we are no longer meant to play. That's not to say that's not to say like that person can't find redemption, hope, forgiveness, restoration, and other things of their lives. But that they can't go on to have a beautiful life. But you can't just like, oh, I forgave you, and just act like nothing happened and like everything's just hunky-dory all of a sudden. That's not forgiveness. That's just allowing yourself to be a doormat.
That's faking it too, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
that's not real.
Absolutely. That's like that's allowing the person, that's refusing to allow the person to acknowledge their error. And it's like the concept of justice, and the Bible is not about getting back at somebody, but it's about the shalom of God, the wholeness of God, the making of the world and the way the world ought to be. And so long as our part as a Christian, we should forgive people immediately when they've sinned against us. It may take a process, and we may not get there overnight, but we need to practice forgiveness.
Can we forgive Chris Pratt though?
What did Chris Pratt do?
I don't know. He posted a weird message about his wife.
Oh, I have no idea.
It's quite interesting. Sorry, totally changing the subject. What am I doing? ADD Masterminds.
I know, right?
Okay, so Chris Pratt, he made this post, and it was about his wife, and there were a couple things that stuck out to me. One part was that, like, she does everything for me, and she's so good for me, and all I have to do is open a couple pickle jars once in a while. and then he said, and she's given me, a healthy, beautiful daughter, and all this stuff, right? And then it came out later, I saw on Twitter, somebody was saying like his ex-wife has a son who's very unhealthy. For him to say that he's got a healthy daughter with her was one thing. But I think there was like just kind of an element of like this whole like, my wife serves me really well. The photo he showed was her looking adoringly at him and all this stuff. And it was very evangelical and very complementarian the way that it came off. And it was kind of interesting because I read it to someone who's very plugged into the evangelical community. And after they heard it, it was like, I don't hear anything wrong with that. And then I'm just like thinking, anybody outside of the evangelical community will listen to that and be like, this is weird, right? And I was like, I don't want to get into gossiping about Chris Pratt or anything, but like between him, that post, John Piper and some of his weird articles that he's been coming out with. There was like this whole thing with Ray Comfort. Ray Comfort had made this. What happened to Ray Comfort? Ray Comfort made a post about like the reason why we say grace before our dinner is because we don't deserve anything. Like that was kind of what he was saying, and I'm like, okay, so now we have to feel bad about eating too, like and it's just, there's just like, evangelicalism is like a parallel universe, and people live in that parallel universe. And the world looks and sees that sign that says, we don't celebrate Halloween. And they're like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm kind of glad it's an exclusive club I don't have to be a part of. Right? And again, I'm not saying that this means that we have zero convictions ever, but I think, again, it's kind of like, what is the fruit of our convictions? And maybe some of the negativity of that fruit you're okay with. But it's like, it'd be nice if more Christians were aware of the negativity of the fruit.
Sure.
Oh, okay. So this was really interesting. There's a scripture that says when you have kind of like a fallout with somebody at the church, treat them as an unbeliever.
Right.
And one of my friends had said to me, you realize that when it says treat them as an unbeliever, it's like Christians have been doing this wrong. Because how do we treat unbelievers? We love them. We don't shun them. We love them. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is crazy talk. Because all this time we're like, treat them as an unbeliever. It's like, okay, well, I'm just going to pretend I don't know you anymore, right? And it's like, it's crazy to think that somebody who's outside of your faith community, those should be the people that we're loving and we're taking care of. And it's like more so, right? Like, it's like, we got to shower them in love, right? And show them that this is a community that we're trying to reach out to you, right? And it's like, so you've got somebody who has a falling out with the church, to treat them as an unbeliever is to actually actively seek them out and help them. And I'm like, when we talk about all these people who are deconstructing, I feel like what the church has done is said, oh, you question this? All right, well, you're now saying bad things about the church, so we shun you. And then all of that conversation about what's wrong with the church happens in isolation. And the evangelicals continue on their merry way, reading John Piper articles, completely unaware that their post about their wife and how she does everything for him and he only opens up pickle jars doesn't faze them, because that's the society they live in. And they're completely like not self-aware of what that looks like.
Well, I mean, Jesus said we all have our own blind spots, you know. We all see the log in somebody else's, or we all see the speck of dust in somebody else's eye, but ignore the beam sticking out of ours. So like we all, it's not just an evangelical thing. We're all prone to those sort of lack of self-awareness and being spiritually dense when it comes to things. So I don't think it's just an evangelical phenomenon. I think it's a human phenomenon.
It is, but I think evangelicalism has a system that keeps that in place.
Yeah, we definitely have our systems
aware of that, because I think
we definitely have our systems of thought that that have trapped people into thinking like that and make them completely unaware, because like it's almost like there's a rush and competitiveness. Like when I hear the Ray Comfort thing, I didn't see it personally or hear about it personally until you brought it up. But when I hear things like that, I hear like somebody feeling the need to flex their reformed theological muscles so that they can, virtue signal to other people how reformed they are.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it is know your audience, and maybe
Right.
that wasn't his audience, but I think and I mean, it's probably taken out of context, and maybe there's a better context for it and all this stuff.
Right.
But it's just interesting because I think it's but at some level, I feel like there's a whole lot of people that are kind of like, I don't care what the world thinks. The world doesn't know what love is anyways. And so it's like, our love is better. And it's like, yeah, I kind of see people outside the church being more accepting and more loving than the people in the church. That's what I see. That's my perception. You could do what you want with that. You could decide that it's just because I'm so sinful that I don't know what love is anymore. But
Right.
This is what I see.
And I don't know that I necessarily see it. I think I don't see it like that per se. I mean, there's definitely people outside the church who are more loving than people inside the church, no question. Whether one culture is inherently more loving than the other. I can't say that because at least for me, I've been very fortunate to know a lot of very loving Christians, even Christians who have very strong opinions about things, but like they just radiate love. And sometimes I think, especially in the internet, when you can't hear the inflection of somebody's voice and you don't really know them, you just see the 140 characters that somebody banged out on Twitter. Sometimes it's really hard to get a read of where somebody's often coming from. But I mean, I see, just as hateful, nasty stuff on far left, progressive, atheist, militant atheist type stuff. Like honestly, I dare say, I don't know too many militant, hyper aggressive, militant atheist type people that I would consider loving people. That's not to say they don't exist, but I would say, no, they have a dogmatic, militant attitude that's just as cancerous as some of the stuff you see in the church. And so I don't think it's unique to, and so I can't throw evangelicals in the church under the bus like that, even though there's definitely those people that exist. But honestly, I'd go to bat for my fellow evangelicals and the amount of love I've seen them show. That's not to say I wouldn't bust some of their knuckles gladly. Absolutely. There's definitely a lot of knuckles who need to be busted. And some people really need to be taken to the rack and learn to love people. But I don't necessarily see it as oh man, there's all these just tremendous outsiders who are just great at loving people at ways that shame the church. That's true sometimes, but I think that's a unfortunate character that doesn't hold up.
Well, I think there's
from my
something too.
experience.
There's something too about being flexible with your convictions that makes it easier to appear more loving.
Right.
Whether that love is more legit or less legit, maybe that's what the debate is. Because I think and it's like my friend Matt says, seems to me that you love your God more than you love me. And I know that a whole lot of evangelicals I know would not see that as an indictment. And I still see that as an indictment. I'm like, if my God is truly love, there should be very rare occasions where my love does not look like love. Instead, it's not the exception. It seems to be the rule. And that's what bothers me. And maybe it's because of the type of conversations we're having. And it's not necessarily the fault of the way that, people really are. It's just we'd much rather talk about what we disagree about then we would talk about what we do agree about. And I think maybe that's what it is that conversation. And I think this is where we get back to bridge building. It's like, if we could actually sit down with people and talk about what we agree about first, we establish that goodwill, and then we can start going into how we diverge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like for example, and all my life's happening recently. I've been reaching out to some old friends and reconnecting with some old friends. And one of those old friends was actually a girl I went out with a couple times, like 10 or more than 10 years ago. And we just ended up being friends. We had met on a dating website, but we just ended up being friends. Well, I haven't seen her in a long time, and I reconnected with her recently. And this girl that I went out with a couple times 10 years ago, she's now been in a committed, loving lesbian relationship for the past, 6 years. And I've sat down with her and her lesbian girlfriend and had dinner with them multiple times, ran out, got some sushi one night, kind of on a spur of the moment sort of thing. I've even gone to church with them.
Are they fantastic people?
Yeah, I like them. They're good.
Yeah.
Like now, I mean, that's not to say they don't have their issues, and they're quite an eccentric couple. But it's some interesting issues. But it was interesting because they invited me to go to their church, and I went to their church, and it's particularly interesting because the church they go to is a King James only fundamentalist church.
Wow.
Here, yeah, I know, right? And
that's quite the mismatch.
Yeah, I was like, some of these things don't add up. Like, hey, we used to date, and now you're dating a girl, and you weren't much on religion, but now both of you invite me to go to your King James fundamentalist church. Like, I was like, I told them, I was like, I saw that church once and thought about going there. Then I went on their website and I found like they were King James only, and I was just like, I just can't swing that. And but here are two of my friends who are lesbians going to a King James only, and I was like, well, how does the church feel about that? And she's like, well, we don't exactly come in holding hands in the sanctuary on Sunday mornings, but she's like, I don't think people are exactly dumb, but they've been like, she's like, but we love it here and it's a great church. And so I went to a big Sunday outdoor service they had, and the church had a big barbecue after the service, and I went to it and had a gay old time. And
awesome.
And I've invited them to come to my church sometime. So, talk about building some bridges.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's like people are people, and it's like, how do we meet people where they're at?
Right.
Because I mean, in the end, it's like, I don't know if it matters, like what kind of, what do people do on their free time? I don't know. It's like, that's none of my business, right? Like it's
right.
Yeah. Hey, so it's fall and the leaves are dying, Jimmy.
They're dying everywhere.
Leaves are dying.
Darn it. It's so depressing, but it's so beautiful at the same time. I hope when I die one day that I age gracefully like the leaves do, and that the beauty of my death is something that people like drive to see.
I'm already aging beautifully. I've got like the gray hairs in my chin. I'm starting to grow my beard back again, so that's nice.
Nice. No shave November. I think as guys we're kind of lucky on that regard. Like there is something about being a guy that gives us the privilege of, I don't know why it is with women. I guess they bear our children and cook and clean for us and stuff. But for whatever reason, it's like, or maybe it's just a subjective societal change, or we just stress them out. I have no idea, but it's like for whatever reason, for most women, it's like they don't seem to enjoy the aging process quite the way we do. Like we get older, we look more distinguished and mature, and I think generally most guys look better as they get older.
Come on, though, like I don't think gray hair on a woman is not attractive.
No, but we don't prize. we don't prize a 50-year-old woman at the same way we do a 21-year-old woman, but we definitely prize a 50-year-old man in a very different way than we do a 21-year-old man.
Well, that's a dumb cultural norm. I'm like, come on, like Kate Blanchett, beautiful woman.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I think 50?
She's like older than that, I think.
Dang.
Yeah, she's amazing. And I'm like, there's something too, like, I think like, I'm realizing too, I'm just a sucker for like the intelligent woman.
Yeah.
Maybe I just love intelligent people, but it's like, I made a tweet about that. I'm like, I'm a sucker for an intelligent woman. And I'm like, and then I posted under that, and yes, she's very smart. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, you know, like I think it's in Proverbs that it says that gray hair is the sign of wisdom. And I'm like, that applies to all of the genders, like the spectrum, without getting political. All right. So I've been reading like a lot of indigenous literature. That's kind of my fixation right now, probably for the next year. Got a lot of books to read. I'm reading a lot about like Canadian history and, you know, a lot of what went on with our indigenous people.
Is your Canadian Thanksgiving like American Thanksgiving, where we incorporate stories about indigenous people? Do you guys have indigenous people stories with your Thanksgiving?
No. I honestly, it's funny. Thanksgiving, I'm just like, it's a good day to think about being thankful. Don't really tie it to like that guy on a ship. Not going to name that person.
We always have the...
Not getting political. The guy with the ship.
Elon Musk? No.
Yeah. But anyways, so I was reading this book. It's called, and I don't know if I'm quoting it right, but it's like A Mind Poured Out on the Ground. And the language that this author, Alicia Elliott, was talking about, it's an indigenous language, and forgive me, I don't remember which language it was, but their word for depression is a mind poured out on the ground. And I'm like, that's so beautifully poetic.
Wow.
And her writing is just like beautiful. It's probably the most beautiful writing I've ever read. I was saying to a loved one, I'm like, it's like the best writing I've ever read, like next to the Apostle Paul. No. But anyways, okay, so she said this. I've heard people say that when you learn a people's language, you learn their culture. It tells you how they think of the world, how they experience it. That's why translation is so difficult. You have to take one way of seeing the world and translate it to another, while still piecing the words together so they make sense. I would say this almost relates to what we were saying before about evangelicalism versus like the outside world, because I think there is a huge language difference going on there too. And it's like,
what is that guy's name? I forget his name. He's very popular religious journalist writer.
Willy Wonka.
No, and he's I believe he's gay, but he was raised in evangelical
Jonathan Merritt. Church. I read his book.
Yes.
Learn to speak God from scratch. Beautiful book.
Yes, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That jogged that phrase, that what you were talking about, jogged that book.
Well, there's a lot of words from the Bible that we've fossilized, is what he argues.
Sure.
And it's like, and the nature of language is that it evolves over time.
Right.
And so that's kind of the thing, right? So it's like he's in like New York and he says, I want to find a worship service. And someone looks at him like, worship of what?
Right.
And he's from the South, where a worship service is obviously a Christian worship service, right?
Right.
And so, but that's true. I mean, like the language is like, and I think I talked about this before on ADD Masterminds, where I said like, have the humility to learn the language, like to actually learn the language of somebody you want to connect with, kind of like love language. which is a whole other thing. I think there was somebody who said, yeah, this whole love languages thing is garbage. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I do find it funny though, people who are like, my love language is gifts, buy me stuff. I'm like,
right.
that seems kind of sus to me.
I'm all about receiving some stuff.
My love language is $1 million.
It can be so hard to adapt though, because like, and I think I hear that especially when we hear a lot of typical Protestant, like sort of pre-canned call to salvation type messages that we confuse with preaching the gospel. Like if you were to say to somebody, if you wanted to get right with Jesus, then you need to be justified by faith, not counting your own righteousness as anything towards God, but as dirty rags. And unless you lean on the righteousness of Jesus and plead the blood of Christ, you can't be saved. And I sit there and think about that, and like all that may be theologically true, but could you imagine if you lived in a world where that wasn't language that you were familiar with? Like it would just be like, huh? Like today, for example, I had to explain to my secular therapist, who I'm seeing, and he's been probing around with my history and stuff. And I went to Bible college and seminary, and he asked, well, why didn't you ever become a pastor? And I got into some of the detailed reasons, but I had to I was like, well, are you familiar with Pentecostalism? And he's like, are those the people that handle the snakes?
Yes, like, let's just go with that.
Right. And so I had to explain to him, a secular educated man, the phenomenon of being filled with the Spirit and speaking in tongues.
Right.
And how that particular phenomenon and the exact verbiage of that particular denominational creed was something that I could not agree to. That even though I agreed with the experience, I didn't agree that tongues has to be the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Like, could you imagine if I had to sit there and use that language to explain to my secular therapist why I chose not to get ordained in that denomination?
And I mean, clearly, snakes is the initial evidence.
Right, because if you get bit, you're clearly not filled with the Spirit.
That's the title of the podcast right there.
If you get
clearly,
bit,
snakes is the initial evidence.
Oh, clearly, snakes is the initial evidence. Absolutely. I loved how these things just draw out. Like,
oh man, it's crazy. Like, okay, so, but that's the thing, right? Have the humility to learn the language. So your therapist had to have the humility to pretend he was interested, but you know what I mean? It's like, in order to he wants to understand your world, right? Because I have to for his job,
right? But then I can't just come at him and just blast him with it. I had to have the humility to recognize this guy's going to think I'm a lunatic if I just tell him what's up.
Exactly.
And then he's not going to understand me on top of it. So I had to break it down in a way he could understand it, as somebody who, I don't know his degree of exposure to even Christianity. I'm assuming because he lives in the South, he knows a thing or two about Christianity. But Pentecostalism is not exactly mainstream in a lot of, it exists. There's lots of big Pentecostal churches, but in the South, but I will say there's still a fringe element to it. Usually there's a big Pentecostal church in a city, not a bunch of little ones. But anyway, I digress. So it's having to try to explain that concept to an outsider, that was hard, but I thought I broke it down in such a way as he could understand it.
Good job,
and
Jimmy.
I think he understood me. I think he saw where I was coming from.
But that's the thing though, right? What you just were explaining though was magic words. It's
right.
saying Literally. The right magic word, saying the right magic words to get God on our side.
Right.
As the Great Bridge of Watt says.
Right. Absolutely. That was a dope album, by the way. Dope album. You need to drop another hot. That's the best.
I gotta get my producers on album too. Right. It's all recorded. I'm just Anyways.
All right.
Okay, but here's the thing. It's like I've been thinking, I continuously think about like how I want a faith that goes beyond magic words. And I'm
Right.
like, to be able to explain to someone, like, look, I believe that God is love.
Right.
And I believe that I'm called to be love. I'm
Right.
called to live a life that pursues love. And I need forgiveness when I fall short of love. And like to me, that's it. That's everything. And I mean, you can add whatever magic words to it, but I feel like sometimes we get so lost in the magic words
Right.
that there's a series of convictions, and those series of convictions become an us and them situation. And it's us versus the world. And we're talking about the saved and the lost. And then whenever I hear Christians talking about the lost, I want to say, like, I get lost sometimes, guys. Let's have a little humility, like, because
Right.
it's like there's kind of this whole idea, I know a better love than you do, so you just shut up and listen to me explain to you all the magic words you need, right?
Let
And
me
it's
Christian
like,
explain you.
yeah, and I'm like, I think it's like, I don't know, I think we all have a ton to learn about love.
Sure.
And it's like, what does love look like? And I think for me, I'm realizing that sometimes love looks like me laying down my convictions.
Hmm.
And it's like, do I think God will be mad at me for laying down my convictions? Well, the God I know is like, that was silly to begin with. you know? And so I don't know. I think life's too short to just be grumpy and pointing your finger at people all the time. Hey, I had this thought. If my name was like Mike Myers, or if my name was Nicolas Cage,
You'd be very rich.
I think it would be hilarious to just start autographing photos of those famous stars with my own signature.
Why not?
And
Nick
just
Cage
like,
actually
I
signed
would
those.
buy that. Like, I would totally buy
Right.
that if somebody
Right.
did that. I'm like, I don't want Nicolas Cage's signature. I want
Right.
the unfamous Nicolas Cage's signature, because that's just hilarious.
Right. Absolutely.
So, what is meta? It's
It's
like a
everything, John.
virtual
It's good.
reality. Does anybody even
No,
really know what it is? It's going to be a virtual
it's
reality where we can hang out with boomers and argue about politics.
right. We can do it virtually, like we're there in their living room without actually being there in their living room.
I'm
Like,
seriously now on Facebook like once a week. I'm trying to be on it more, but I've just so lost interest. I'm just sick of the
John, then how are you going to see
toxicity.
my how are you going to see my food pictures?
Don't you post them on every social media anyways?
Yeah, I do.
No, you post the same thing on every medium, so it's all good. I know I'm not
Well,
missing anything, Jimmy.
I will say, like lately, if I want to be a little edgy and controversial, I leave most of those just to Twitter, where I think people can handle it a little bit more. Because there's some edgy or controversial things I'll say, like if I say this, my mom's gonna hear it. I don't
Yeah.
want to have the conversation with my mom.
Facebook has all the people that you have to be friends with. Twitter,
Right,
I only curate what I'm interested in. And so it's a
right.
much more positive space. I'll see someone
It's
tweet something. I've unfollowed so many people on Twitter too, where I'm like, I see somebody tweet something and I'm like, I don't want to argue with them.
right.
Unfollow. I'm just like, I just can't.
I, I will say, like, yeah, it's amazing. Like, 95% of my Twitter friends are not my Facebook friends, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, like Facebook is, you know, and Twitter do not have much overlap. There's a couple
Yeah.
people that overlap, but not many. And part of that is like I feel like they attract two different crowds to some degree. It's like
Yeah.
those overlapping circles. What is it, Venn diagram?
Hey,
Um,
one of the things I
and
do find interesting about Facebook is that I've friended people that are like, a bit more famous. So like I love the musician Aaron Sprinkle, and I finally got up the courage to like friend him on Facebook, and he accepted it. I'm like, what?
Wow.
And then like I'm trying to think of who else. I think most recently I discovered that Shane Claiborne actually accepted my invitation. I'm like, what? Yeah. But I think
Wow.
also like my friend Paul Edgar knows him. And so that might be why, because Paul's like,
Mm,
maybe you should have him on your podcast sometime. I'm like, I would love that. But
interesting.
Shane's an interesting dude. Like if you talk about somebody who legitimately lives, like he's almost like a real life. He's like a real life John the Baptist.
Mm.
But I mean, you know what I mean? Like he kind of lives very differently from other people. And it's like, I want to hear what he has to say because he seems so legit in everything he does.
Mm.
Um, anyways. Yeah, so Meta,
I'm just
my
ready
thing
for
is
the
my
red pill
beef
and the blue
right
pill.
now. I gotta say, my beef right now is that Mark Zuckerberg sucks at naming everything.
It's
Like,
such a Meta is such a boomer name.
well, Facebook. Like, how dumb is that name?
Well, he didn't come up with Facebook. That was originally somebody else's name. Did you ever see the movie
Yeah, I
that
saw
they
the
did about
movie.
Facebook?
Didn't he
Yeah.
start it just to rate hotties?
No, he didn't start it. Some other guys did, and they hired him to program it. And then that's when he double crossed them and took it over. And they called it the Facebook, though. He just decided it just needed to be Facebook.
Genius.
But yeah, like it definitely had. It was definitely written originally for college kids.
By the way, Meta, I think they're getting in trouble because somebody else called their company Meta. So.
Well, I've already noticed that they already changed the name on the stock exchange, so that ratchets it up a little bit.
All right. Hey, so offensive comedy. I feel like people who defend offensive comedy are like pretty much this is what they're saying. I can say whatever I want and call it comedy. Right?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm just like, I think it's lazy. To me, it's lazy to be cruel to get people to laugh. That's what
I
I
don't know. I think when you start, I think comedy needs to remain this. Like when a comedy takes place in a certain context, I think it needs to be as open book as possible, because if you start limiting what jokes people can and cannot say, like I almost liken it unto book burning. Like you're saying, like, oh, these are the acceptable books, these are the unacceptable books. The unacceptable books go in that fiery pit over there. And so I think if you start limiting comedians and what they can say, then you're really engaging in almost a form of censorship and book burning. Like, do you have to find everything that's said on stage funny? No, but I think we need to definitely grant like formal comedians. And when I say like formal comedians, I mean somebody who's getting up there and putting on an act, putting on a show. I'm not just talking about somebody who's running their lip at the schoolyard. I think that's different. One is an artistic performance. The other is just some punk running their lip at the school who is just saying whatever they want. But I think that if you have it so that you start censoring what comedians can and cannot say, like you're choking the art of comedy, because comedy is in part funny because it's able to take the risk of saying the offensive thing. And if all of a sudden there are taboos and things you can't tell jokes about, then I think you're getting into an area where you possibly might kill the art form itself.
Well, I think it's funny how people always have to defend the worst possible things to prove a point about freedom.
Yeah,
And I'm
for
like,
sure.
I'm not a fan of this whole conversation about freedom of speech and trying to defend people that say horrible things all the time. I mean, I'm not out to legislate what a comedian can or cannot say, not getting political, but
Mhm.
but I much rather promote responsible speech
Yeah,
than
for sure.
trying to defend the deplorable. You know, like I'm like, you know what? He didn't need
Well,
to say that. You know, like I'm
I
like,
think
that
to
person didn't need to say that. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna watch the entire comedy special so I can pick it apart and say what I think they said wrong.
yeah.
Because also I don't want that comedy special to get one more view. Right? And I'm just
Yeah.
like, you know, but I do really want to encourage people to be responsible with their speech. And I want to demonstrate being responsible with your speech. Because I'm like, people are always like, oh, you should never punch down. You should only punch up. And I'm like, I don't know why we're punching to begin with. Like, I think
Yeah.
like to say this system is silly, I get it. And even, you know, what I said, I can say whatever I want and call it comedy. That's a jab. It's really a
Yeah.
jab at people who think offensive comedy is funnier. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's lazy comedy. It really is. Like, I'm like, I think a good comedian can make a joke without punching someone. I think.
Right. I think I think you can be right about that. For sure. But I don't know. I like, as much as I'm like, I'm with you for the responsible speech. I'm also for the responsible listening. Like, we shouldn't just watch everything that appears on our TV and say, well, it's on TV, so it's okay to watch. You know, like, we should be selective in not only what we say, but what we listen to. But I mean, I do think we do have to. I still would say, but with that caveat, I still am like me. I will defend the most deplorable speech possible, simply because I believe that men we need to the recognition of the human right to the freedom of speech, which I interpret as the right to blaspheme. I think we need to defend even the greatest of blasphemies, simply because if we don't defend blasphemy, then when something truly important needs to be said, there's going to be those who are going to say, no, we can't say those things around here. And it is better to let things thrive in the marketplace of ideas, and to find whether or not they're welcome, or to find whether or not they need to be shown the door, through discourse and the right to engage in critical speech. But with that said, like, I don't want to blaspheme. I'm not a blasphemer, I don't think. Um, but I want to defend the right of somebody to say the most deplorable thing possible, simply because it is important that people have that right above almost any other right. Because if we can't be a society that traffics in ideas, then I worry about what sort of society we become.
What is the fruit of that conviction? Defending the deplorable and saying
The
it's really important that we let this person attack
it's
this group of people who are suicidal. It's really important that we let him say things that bring those people down further
it's
in
important we
in the name of free speech.
it's important that we have that right, and the fruit of that is then we can create dialogue, so that
And
we
you
can sit
think
there
you
and
can
say,
change minds through this
sure,
dialogue? Do you think
absolutely.
that like our
We wouldn't be where
social
we are.
media,
We wouldn't be where we are today unless we had that dialogue. We would still be believing the earth is flat if we could not have that dialogue.
do you think that like then Facebook shouldn't be doing fact checks?
Uh, I have mixed opinions on what Facebook should do. Like,
I just don't
it's
have that much hope in humanity. I've had a lot of dialogue with people I disagree with, and I used to be really good at having those conversations.
I
And
think if
now the crazy is at such a
uh,
level that I'm like, I just cannot refute every argument, because I feel like I have to
right.
defend against every conspiracy theory ever.
Well, but
Because
I think
people do not appeal to authority anymore.
right,
They distrust all authorities on everything, and they have a lot of faith in their own ability to comprehend things. And
right.
I don't have that much faith in my own ability to comprehend things.
I
So
think it's better for it to be out in the open, and maybe Facebook should have some censorship. But look at what happens when they don't. When they don't, or look what happens when they do have the censorship. It creates a group of people who all of a sudden they feel like somebody's out to get them, just like they suspected all along. So you only confirm they're all out to get us bias, and that ends up forming little cliques and people on the fringes of society who continue to chat, just not in an open form where everybody else can see them. And so that's why they have crazy stuff like, I don't know if you saw it this past week in Dallas, a bunch of QAnon Trump supporters showed up to Dallas expecting JFK Jr. to show up and endorse Donald Trump as the next president of the United States. JFK Jr. has been dead for like 15 years. But they all believe, because these people have been forced to the fringes, and they're having their hundreds of people showed up, maybe even thousands of people showed up to downtown Dallas or wherever it was in Texas to hold banners awaiting the arrival of JFK Jr. So, like, I don't believe that group exists without people being pushed into the fringes, and without people being censored, and without people being made to feel like somebody's out to get them and to shut them down. Because when you start having that, then that's the fruit of that ends up being the crazies who are standing around waiting for JFK Jr. to arrive, or the crazies who stormed the Capitol on January 6th because they believe Facebook is co-conspiring with Joe Biden and the Democrats and the Communist Party to take over the country, and that they've had an election stolen. So I think there's real danger, and when you start trying to even talk about policing the speech, I think it's better for speech to be a free for all, so that the mutual exchange of the most terrible ideas and the best ideas can happen. Because over time, when the best ideas are held up against the worst ideas, I believe over time those terrible ideas will end up dying, because that's just how things work when there's a mutual exchange of ideas. When you don't have that,
everybody's got access to all the good ideas. The people who are thinking crazy have all the access to the good ideas, but they have way more access to the bad ideas. And so, I mean, like, to me, I see this a lot in evangelicalism. They keep saying, I have to defend the deplorable so that we can be free enough so that good ideas can win. I don't have that much faith in humanity. I also think that this is a conviction. And when that conviction is at the forefront of everything that is your witness, I don't want your faith.
but if you have that conviction that we shouldn't have that language, that openness, and that you don't have that faith in humanity,
I'm not.
then you're saying you have the
am,
faith in humanity to police it. Who's going to be the ones that police it? You're putting faith in somebody to police speech at some level.
No,
I don't have.
No.
Well, if you don't allow it all,
fighting against freedom of speech. I am promoting responsibility of speech.
and I think the only way you can do that is a freedom of speech.
Well, you can keep fighting for freedom of speech, but I don't think it helps anyone when you're saying you have to defend deplorable things. I'm like, all I see is people who are against loving speech. We want to defend the deplorable in the name of freedom. And then once we have all that freedom, humanity will figure out what's right in their own eyes, but we as a democracy will determine good things all the time. And eventually, love will win that way. But first, I need to defend evil. But eventually, if we allow for enough freedom, love will win. For me, I'm just like, you know what? I'll let you guys argue over freedom or not freedom. I'm going to continue to say, I don't know if he should have said that.
Right.
Because when it comes down to my atheist friend, who again seems to understand love more than a lot of Christians I know, he says, why is that on your heart to say that? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that was the Holy Spirit speaking through Matt, even though he doesn't have the Holy Spirit. Why is that on your heart to say? And I'm like,
right. That's a good question.
It is a good question. And I'm like, I need to ask that question of myself. And I need to look at somebody and say, why is that on his heart to say? Why does he need to attack these people? And I'm like, that's sad to me. Right. And it's just amazing to me that politics has brought us to the point where we have to either being like, say, that guy needs to be canceled, or I need to defend this horrible thing this person said. Because when I defend the horrible thing that this person said, you're now opposed to the person they were attacking to. And you're saying that person doesn't matter. And I'm like, that's just incredible to me that that's where Christianity's come to, you know? And
but I don't even think that's necessarily a Christian thing. Like, look at I'm sure you're familiar with the ACLU. Like, you know,
no idea what
ACLU. So ACLU gets a pretty bad rap of being a hyper liberal justice organization in America, and they are often seen as pushing an extremely liberal narrative, and they file lawsuits over left and right, like bathroom bills, like, oh yes, transgender people should be able to use the bathroom of their choice and all that sort of stuff. Like, they're on the forefront of fighting for stuff like that in America. But at the same time, these guys have also been known as lawyers, like not only to defend such groups and to defend abortion rights and things like that, but they've also gone and defended groups like neo-Nazis in America marching across from a synagogue and their right to do that, or the right of the Klan to assemble and to protest, and the right of what's that crazy Baptist church people?
Westboro.
Westboro. Like, they've defended all these lunatics, and they do so not because they believe in anything these guys are saying, but because they recognize the importance of civil liberties in society, and that those civil liberties should be respected no matter how deplorable we may deem them. And this is like a group that, like I said, tends to be on the hyper liberal side of progressive things, and most Christians would not be friends with the ACLU. Most evangelicals wouldn't, but these people will even defend those rights because they recognize those inalienable rights as being so sacred and so important that, yes, Westboro Baptist should be able to stand outside of a soldier's funeral and protest, or yes, the Nazis should be able to praise Hitler in the middle of a New York City across from the synagogue. You know, they recognize these things, and that's why, like, you're not saying that the other people don't matter. They absolutely do, and they matter because they should have the right not only to have that ability to say terrible things like the Nazis do, but they should also have the right to say things back against the Nazis. And that right is more important than all others.
But first, you must oppose the person that they're hurting. That's the problem. That's the problem I have with this. Yeah. I'm like, there's no reason why I need to oppose the person that's being hurt. So if people want to argue over the civil liberties, which is so funny because it's just kind of like, what does the Bible say about civil liberties? Bible speaks a lot about responsibilities.
Oh yeah, for sure.
doesn't talk about civil liberties. That's a concept of empire. And I think a whole lot of people who claim that the Bible is everything to them have put other things ahead of the Bible when they're more willing to fight for those deplorables and their right to do deplorable things, as
Oh
opposed
yeah,
to
for sure.
promoting love first and foremost. And
Right.
that's a big problem the church has right now.
Oh
And
yeah,
I'm like,
we're far too American in that regard. I think we do need to have a sense in which we personally choose to lay down our rights and not to, pick up our rights and then taunt them at others. Like, they're like, especially like I've seen it like with the mask mandates and stuff. Like, I'm not necessarily a fan of the mask mandates. I think they're kind of counterintuitive and actually maybe might, you're not going to win hearts and minds by attempting to drag people across a predetermined finish line. But I think that, with that said, there are so many people who will be like, no, I'm not going to wear a mask because it's my right. And part of me is like, man, you need to wear a mask, like, even if it's stupid, just to lay down your right. This is an opportunity to deny yourself and to lay down your right. And yes, it may be stupid that I go to a restaurant and I have to wear a mask for the first 10 feet I'm in the restaurant. And then when I sit down, it's like, oops, COVID doesn't exist anymore. I don't need my mask. Or it's stupid that I went to a hockey game and I have to wear a mask at the hockey game. But if I'm eating nachos and drinking beer, I'm free at the hockey game to remove my mask. But as soon as I'm done, I got to put it back on. Like, none of that makes any sense, logically speaking. But
well,
I
we could
still say,
stop letting people eat food in public. I mean,
but
that's
then we
the
would,
other option, right?
right. But like, these are options like we have. But I think at the end of the day, it's like people who like really fight against it. It's like, you just don't want to die to self. You don't want to lay down your rights because you see your rights as an American as more important than the love that Jesus calls you to show for your enemy, or for those who wrongfully persecute you, or for those who misuse you and mistreat you, or for those who stamp on your rights. Like,
But I mean,
there's a place.
this is all political again, though, right? Because it's like, if we give the government 1 inch by wearing a mask, they're going to take away all our rights, and we're all going to
Right,
get rounded up and put into boxcars. And like, like that's it,
right,
right? And that's
right,
kind of, and all of this becomes like such a slippery slope, right? It's always a
right,
slippery slope. And I mean, when it comes down to it, I'm like, what are my responsibilities? What are my responsibilities to my community? What are my responsibilities to, to, give to Caesar's what's Caesar's, to give to God
right,
what is God's? And I think a lot of times we get so stuck on the bigger picture. And I think that's what a lot of the convictions are, is that a conviction is like, oh, but the bigger picture is this. So
right,
if I contribute in any way to this, then I've made myself impure. And it's
right,
like, okay, or I've allowed this person to be impure. But in that situation, in that person to person interaction, are they seeing love? And I'm like, I think that's what we need to work at, is figuring out how to make people see love. And so when Matt and I started talking about this particular comedy special, him saying, I think we just need to ask, why is that on your heart to say? And I mean, you could say, why is that on your heart to do? And
mm,
I think a lot of times we act out of fear. I'm
right,
afraid. I'm afraid of what the broader implications are of me allowing this to happen. I'm afraid of what the broader implications are of me, allowing them to say he shouldn't say that, right? Like there's always these broader implications, but when it comes down to it, I have loved ones in my life who I know are being hurt directly by a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
You know, and when you talk about like COVID, it's like I know people who can't go to surgeries because our ICUs are full, but yet we still got a contingency of people that are like the ICUs are not full. And I'm like, I don't know. The world's gone crazy. All I know is my friend can't go to surgery. So I don't know. I'm going to do what I can to try to make sure that my friend can go to surgery.
Right.
And I'm less concerned about civil liberties than I am about my friend going to surgery, you know? And I mean, part of it too is you got to think, can I win this fight? If I stick to my convictions, is there any hope whatsoever that things are going to change? They're going to stop making us wear a mask at the hockey game. And the answer is no.
Right.
The only thing you're going to do, and I'm guarantee the fallout of your conviction is if there's any kind of indication that you are a Christian, and there's been multiple times I've gone on Twitter and I'm like, this guy is a total, like, terrible, terrible person. I'm going to go
Right.
look at their bio to see if it says Christian. Oh, it does. I'm not surprised,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And I see so much of that. And I'm saying this as a person who I don't attend church right now.
Mm.
And so I'm one of those people on the fringes right now. And I don't like what I'm seeing. And maybe that's as a result of my own sin, and people can judge me for that. But honestly, I want to pursue love, and I'm finding places, I'm finding community where I can pursue love. And it doesn't look like a conventional community. And
Mm.
that's where I'm at right now. And so I'm like, it saddens me that the people that claim to follow Jesus look nothing like him. And I don't want to become like that in my criticism of people like that. Because it's
Right.
like the more angry and the more you push against someone, the more likely you are to become exactly what they are.
Right.
And I'm realizing that. And I've been like watching the Revolution Church streams, and they've been really convicting to me. And, you know, there's just a lot there because Jay Baker, he's a progressive, but his father is very much fundamentalist. And Jay knows all about being attacked by the media continuously. And so he sees a lot of things that most people don't. And he really calls people to learn how to disagree well and work
Right.
through those conversations. And in some ways, I'm not ready for those conversations. I'm like,
Mm.
well, I've had these arguments multiple times with people, and I know the result is that these people don't care. They don't care about people like me. They don't care about people that I love very much and I'm trying to take care of right now. Because their convictions tell them to write us off. And that's unfortunate because that doesn't look like Christ to me.
Right.
And it saddens me, but I want to make sure that I'm not so angry at those people that I become just as hateful, because that
Oh yeah, for
happens.
sure.
I see that all the time. I see the hate that's being spewed. I saw the hate that was spewed at Chris Pratt, and I'm like, that's so silly. Like you guys are being worse. He was trying to be nice to his wife,
Right.
and he can't see what was wrong at all with that. And a lot of evangelicals can't see what was wrong with that.
Right.
And so it's like, how do we, and I think that is where Christianity really should shine, is where you've got this leftist like cancel culture that's saying like, you can't say that or you can't do that. Christians can say, okay, you know what? Why is that on your heart to say, first and foremost? And second, it's like, let's figure out how we can restore you after you've messed this up, you know?
Right.
And I think that's maybe the sweet spot. I'm still figuring it out. I got a lot to figure out right now, but
I'll be there to hold your hand, John.
Yeah, that's right.
Over at jimmystable.com.
Well, thanks, Jimmy. This was good therapy.
It was good. I enjoyed it, man. It's been a long time since we've done one of these. Like I'm in a hotel in Raleigh tonight. I'm not in Charlotte, and where I normally do this. And so I was like, oh man, ADD Masterminds. It's been forever in like my life. I've not done an ADD Masterminds since my life has changed, and you know, I'm very happy to be able to do this because I miss doing it.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love doing this show. It's like, it usually is like a lot less serious than the Wax Museum, and I think we did have some light moments, but this got a bit heavier too.
Yeah, like this was a pretty heavy episode for ADD Mastermind. Usually we need to get Theosaurus Rex on here so he can say the inappropriate things and we can laugh at it. Ha ha ha.
We will have him back for sure.
Yes, for sure. And the girl. I love the girl.
The girl is awesome. This time she's not having a baby, so yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Love all of you, except for that one guy.
Word to your mother. Yeah, except for that one guy. He's terrible.
Air Smudge.